they found that a tumor was sort of knocking at my nervous system and causing me to slow down and eventually causing paralysis.
I started losing my vision to an extent that glasses couldn't correct by the time when I was about 12 years old. You are such an inspiration. You are so amazing. Or like Nebuch, when Mashiach comes, you'll be the first one to get your vision back. All these things that they really think they're making me feel good. Again, well-intentioned, not really, doesn't really make someone feel as good.
Would you have invited us, quite frankly, if I would not have had to be a wheelchair user?
Yoel Yitzchak Bodek lost the use of his legs after a childhood illness. His wife, Rochel Yenti, gradually lost her vision until she became legally blind. Both grew up deeply rooted in the Chasidish community, and they're here to share why they don't see themselves as inspirations. They open up about what not to do when interacting with people facing medical challenges, and rightfully, they challenge the very premise of this show. I can't wait for you to hear their perspective. This week's episode is sponsored by Woodman College, Wales Talise, Pipin, and Feldheim. This episode is in memory of Miriam Sarbas Yaakov Moshe and Shimon David ben Yaakov Shleima. Before we jump in, we're so curious, what kind of person is watching this? Please type down below if you're Chasidish, if you're Jewish but not Chasidish, or you're not Jewish. We're really interested in what kind of episodes you, our audience, is into. Here we go. Thank you so much, Yoel Yitzchak and Rochel Yenti Bodek, for coming and doing this. You each have very different backgrounds, and it's cool how you mesh together, and we're going to talk, a lot to talk about, but could you start from the beginning?
Sure.
Yoel Yitzchak, could you tell us about your childhood?
Thank you for having us. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to an exciting conversation. As a kid, I grew up in Williamsburg. I was born just like any other kid. People see me on the street today using a wheelchair for purposes of getting around. However, when I was born just like a normal kid. When I was about 14 months old, my parents noticed that I sort of slowed down and stopped doing what I guess little toddlers would be trying to do at that age, which is getting up and starting to take the first steps. I stopped doing that. After taking me to several doctors and I guess different diagnostic tests, they found that a tumor was sort of knocking at my nervous system and causing me to slow down and eventually causing paralysis. Baruch Hashem, I was treated, I recovered from that, but in fact, the tumor left me paralyzed pretty much for life. And that is hard to think, but it's almost 45 years ago. And since then, Baruch Hashem, I've lived what I would say a very independent life in every facet of my life at every point, be it in Cheder, in Satmar, in Williamsburg, later on in Yeshiva and Shari Yesher under the leadership of Rav Rosenblum, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, and then into me becoming what I would hopefully think of a professional in the world of insurance, as well, of course, as being married, Baruch Hashem, now 22 years. And our kids we've got twin boys who are now 17 and a half years old and in Yeshiva, Baruch Hashem, doing very well. It's just been, so far, a very exciting life and looking forward to many, many more healthy and productive years.
Okay, beautiful. And I'm going to ask you about the stigma that maybe was involved when you were younger as a baby. But before we get to that, Rochel Yenti, could you tell us about your childhood and your background?
Okay, yes. So I was also born, I guess, what you would call, quote unquote, a regular, normal, whatever, childhood for the most part. I did have glasses from a very young age. I was in pre-1A, I think, when I got my first pair of eyeglasses. And they did help quite a bit until I was about 11, 12 years old. I kept, my prescription kept being adjusted. And apparently I did have a condition, congenital condition, but it didn't, come out until I was older, and it's called cone rod dystrophy. So basically I started losing my vision to an extent that glasses couldn't correct by the time when I was about 12 years old. So throughout my teenage years, that's when my vision really deteriorated a lot. I still, Baruch Hashem, to this day have quite a bit of usable vision. Sometimes I'll say I'm sighted to the blind and I'm blind to the sighted. I'm somewhere in between. So it was a difficult time for me, the time of losing my vision at that age. And I did see a therapist at that point. And that's what made me, at some point, decide to become a social worker. And that was like something I was looking forward and helped me a lot, like throughout, for many years. That was like my outlook, that I'm working towards a goal and I have something I'm living for and something I'm looking forward to. In between, I married my husband, who's, introduced himself and amazing and capable. And, yes, he's a wheelchair user, but there's much more than that. We don't define ourselves by our disabilities. We define ourselves by abilities. And eventually, I actually changed my major, decided social work is not for me, and I decided to become a teacher of the visually impaired. Some of it was because of, life circumstances. One of our twins was visually impaired with the same eye condition since a very young age, and I got very involved in the field of support for visually impaired, which didn't really exist much in our frum world. And that also made me decide to become a special teacher, a teacher of the visually impaired, which I do now. And I also have a support group called Insight Beyond Eyesight from families of visually impaired individuals. We also service anyone who will reach out to us, not necessarily Jewish or frum, but our focus is on the frum community. And that's basically who I am.
Okay, great. I have 15 questions for each of you, but let's, I guess, start with Yoel. I think childhood cancer is obviously never simple, but going back, you mentioned 45 years ago, what was the dynamic? Obviously, it's before you could even remember, but from what you know as you're growing up, what was that stigma like? And my next question is, in the Chasidish community, was it even bigger of a stigma?
Sure. So, we know that the Rebbeinu Shalom often sends the refuah before the makkah, right? He will prepare the remedy before the calamity, or whatever the right way of expressing that is. In my case, my mother was originally from Toronto, who, although grew up with Chasidish parents, was not part of the mainstream Chasidish community in Brooklyn. And so when my mother was dealing with my condition at the time, she was shocked to see how other people would practically hide their kids behind the door, or wouldn't speak about them, and the stigma was significant. And that was a big part of what got her to start an organization that was known as Caring and Sharing. Caring and Sharing, to some extent, is the forerunner of many other very well-known popular organizations out there that help those that deal with cancer. And so her mindset was, there's no stigma. And to her, it was all about giving me the tools that I needed to grow up and be self-sufficient and grow up to be a very independent young man. Obviously, I was practically a toddler, so I don't remember the specifics in the physical sense, but I do know many of the stories that my mother would repeat and share over the years that have stayed with me. There was a very strong focus on emunah and bitachon. My mother ingrained in me that everything in life is done for a purpose. There are no accidents, there are no mistakes. The story that was told is very common, definitely I remember while growing up, in Williamsburg, when there would be an announcement in a community about some sort of an event, they would often send around a car with a loudspeaker that would announce happy occasions, or loyal sadly, a levaya, a funeral. And the story goes that when I would hear that, I would tell my mother, look, there's somebody who's announcing Mashiach is coming, or they're announcing Shema Yisrael. This was sort of ingrained in me, in my psyche when I was growing up. Also, the way that she wasn't only the way that she spoke to me, it was also what she did and what she would tell other people. People would stop her on the street and they would tell her, Mrs. Bodek, and they would wish her, one day you'll see nachas from your kid who's in a wheelchair and it's probably very difficult. And she would say, I see nachas from him every day. So to her, it wasn't just about, okay, let's just get through this. Mm. She was living it every day. And in life, very often, and I'm guilty of this myself sometimes, we're just waiting for that next thing to come. Instead of living in the present, what we have right now is important. What we have right now is a gift, and we ought to realize that. So I think she was very much aware of that. There's a very famous story. It's famous because the story was often retold by Yitzchak Crow, I think it's in one of his books about me, which is we would go to Rusk Institute at NYU, I think, I don't remember the exact schedule, once a week or so for physical therapy when I was a kid. Unlike today, where haven't been on a public bus for decades, but I think pretty much all public buses today in New York City are wheelchair accessible. But back in the day, it was like every third or fourth bus had a ramp, and it wasn't that all of them were accessible. My mother would take the bus to Manhattan from Williamsburg for my physical therapy sessions. And on one of the occasions, that particular bus did not have the ramp. My mother wanted to get on the bus because I guess she wanted to get to the appointment on time. And the bus driver said, "Lady, you can't bring wheelchair on the bus. There's no ramp." And after haggling with the bus driver, my mother said, "We're coming on the bus." And so she pulls me up on the bus with the wheelchair in tow. And as she settles down, the bus driver is very upset. And somebody pipes up and says, "Lady, your son's not handicapped. It's the bus driver who's got a handicapped mind." And so that was her approach. And that is something that carries me every day without a doubt. And so about stigma, stigma was not an issue in my life. I wouldn't say I wasn't aware of it. I certainly was aware I'm different. Obviously, I'm the only kid, not only in my class, but in Satmar, we had hundreds of kids. I was the only kid in a wheelchair. So I was very different, right? Just by the physical sense of it, physical presentation. However, in my mind, I never felt a stigma. My friends were, I'd say, not only supportive, but I grew up with this mentality of being able to give to other people, being able to lead. And so it wasn't this bitey guy who was always this burden on other people. Of course, my friends helped me get up the steps or things of that nature. But outside of that, I was part of the Chevra. I was part of the Chevra. I got to lead lots of different things in my youth and as I was growing up. So I was very aware of it. It was never an issue in the sense that I felt being held down by it. I'll share 2 stories. One is maybe I'll get a good laugh out of someone. And the other one is, I think it's a serious story. And I hope it was a tremendous life lesson to me. And I hope others will see that as well. And this goes back again to my mother, and definitely my father deserves tremendous credit for this as well. And my mother was just do it, but not just do it, but also do it with intention. My father on that was do it because it's the right thing to do. He didn't make any calculations. It wasn't about having to explain to anyone. And we'll share more about that, I'm sure, as we get into the conversation. But what I want to share right now is once in the Catskills, we would go to one of these places up in Monticello as a kid. I was doing physical therapy with my mother. I used to walk around with a full body brace and crutches. And I gave it up after a while, but I did it mostly to keep me in shape when I was growing up. And as I'm making my way throughout the bungalow colony, I get like a whole chevra watching this very exciting show. And so I turn around to her and I say, "Yankee, you want to watch a show? Isn't the it'll cost you $1?" And so it's that sort of mindset that I grew up with. So yeah, I was aware I'm different, and no question about it. But I grew up different. There's nothing wrong with being different. Mm. And on a more serious note, I don't know if this was stigma as much as it is curiosity. And definitely curiosity is a good thing. I'm super curious. I'm super curious about my professional life. I'm curious about pretty much everything in life, but I also know not everything needs to be spoken about. Not everything is open for public discussion. However, boys, or girls as well, but boys definitely are curious bunch sometimes. And this happened twice in my life, but this one time in particular where there was, in the background, I started hearing a conversation about this Bodek guy's a little different. He gets stressed differently. He has a different program than some of us do in his personal affairs. And I was young, and it really took a toll on me to the point where one day I came home crying. I told my parents, I'm not going back to this Talmud Torah again, and asked that they work on switching me out. It took a while, and then finally I got switched to a different Talmud Torah. And I get to this new Talmud Torah, and everything seems fine until it was a couple of weeks, a couple of months, whatever it is. Soon afterwards, I started hearing some of this conversation again percolating behind me. And I realized, for better or for worse, and Baruch Hashem, I can say now, looking back for better, this is my life, and I can't run away from it. And I have to learn not only to sort of accept and live with it, but I also have to know how I can thrive with it. And it was definitely a very painful dose of medication, if you will, for a young kid. But looking back, we can say those kids did me the biggest favor in my life. And it taught me from a very young age, this is who I am. And I will learn how to not only sort of accept it, deal with it, but also thrive with it. And it's carried me for decades.
It's really beautiful. Okay, you shared a lot there. Rochel, Yenti, I'm curious, did you get bullied when you were younger as your vision was getting worse and worse? Were people supportive?
So I was very, quiet about it. I didn't talk much about it, till many, many years later. My classmates didn't realize that I was like officially what they would call legally blind or anything. They obviously saw that my vision was getting worse and something was happening. And generally they were, I would say, pretty considerate and, not so much bullying. There were some friendship issues, but I could say sometimes I was just as much at fault, as the friends who did it. And perhaps I was sometimes very self-conscious, and I always had the dilemma, who am I going to ask for help? And is it going to be my friend or not? So, I guess it definitely was related to, my not having perfect vision and needing to rely on people sometimes for help that caused some issues. But overall, I would say my classmates were very receptive without even being, informed officially of anything. Which is something nowadays I try to make the classmates. I think it's so important when they are aware and they do have a venue to express themselves just as much as the visually impaired person themselves or whatever disability, because then they can help their classmate or friend or neighbor or whatever so much more. But overall, I'm so impressed looking back how I even had one classmate specifically, I remember, who would, she knew that I had a hard time, serving myself, food, which is one of the big challenges people who are visually impaired have, and people don't always realize it. And she would always, say, what do you want for lunch? I'll bring you, this and this is for lunch. Can I, serve you? Without anyone telling her anything. That was like, wow. That alertness doesn't always come automatically. But thankfully, overall, I can't say that I had too much bullying or issues that way. Baruch Hashem.
I'm curious of each of your perspective on this. When it was getting closer to Shidduchim, were each of you nervous based on, your own challenges that you wouldn't maybe find someone, or you'd be paired up with the wrong kinds of people?
So that's an interesting topic, for sure. I have lots of different thoughts about it. And
this is the place to share. Whatever you want.
Not even to this day. Baruch Hashem, in our case, it's so long ago that I can't say that I remember mamish living the moment during those years. What I will share is one of the gifts that I have had in my life and to this day continue to sort of operate, if you will, with those values or principles, is not sitting around and waiting for the magical person to show up, the magical change in life to show up, the magical treatment to show up that maybe would get me one day walking. I don't know, maybe it's out there, maybe it'll come one day, but I'm not going to sit back and stay home and wait for that to show up, right? Mm-hmm. And so, Baruch Hashem, same thing with Shidduchim, and even with my yeshiva years. Most of my friends, or many of my friends, went to yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. It's one thing I wanted to do. Now, although my parents encouraged independence and confidence and all of that, that was a bridge too far for my father. But still, I grew up, even as a younger adult, not sitting around and waiting for something to show up in order for me to make my next move or take the next step and what I felt is the right thing long term for what I'd like to accomplish in my life. And so when it came to Shidduchim, of course, growing up in Williamsburg in the Chasidish world, where it's common for boys to get engaged when they're 19 or 20, All my friends started to get engaged, and ultimately I didn't get engaged till some years later. But even during that time, I was involved not only in my business, involved in personal things, but also involved in lots of different community activities. And, I mentioned to you earlier, it was just my father's yahrzeit this past Friday. And we had one of my father's friends over to the yahrzeit to speak a little bit about what he remembers of my father. And one of the things that I think he expressed so eloquently was, often people do good things because of, and it's not that there's something wrong with it, but because they'll get recognition, somebody will notice. Is a feel-good sort of feedback to that. But in my father's case, it was, he did it because the thing onto its own was the right thing to do. It wasn't about who's going to notice. It wasn't about somebody who's going to give him recognition. And directly or indirectly, that's my style of operating as well. So your question about shidduchim, one way I think I would answer is not, if you're a young man or a young woman who maybe your shidduch path is not as efficient as maybe you think it ought to be, as the way your friends are having it, don't let that stop you in your tracks from accomplishing other things. And so to the other part of it, my mindset then, and very much to this day, and this is not only just about shidduchim, is also the part of working with people who are able to rise beyond what I would think of as their physical limitations or what appears to be their physical constraints. And when it came to shidduchim, I was very much of the opinion that as long as the person is not defined by their quote unquote physical challenge, then that would be a shidduch suggestion that I would listen to.
Okay, what about you, Rochel Yenti? Did you have I guess, clear mindset as your husband when it came to shidduchim?
Yeah, my husband was a little older and more mature. That's why I was young and stupid. I didn't even think about it much, honestly. I was very young when we got engaged. I met my husband. I was very impressed. He had a very good English. But
before that, you mean he was the first one you were read to?
Basically.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
Okay, that's great.
So I was very impressed about his, seemed to be very educated and knowledgeable, and that was very impressive to me. So I can't say I thought about it much, honestly. I mean, I did have my mindset, as I mentioned earlier, that I was going to, do this college career. And that's what sort of also was sort of like a coping mechanism also for, coping with my vision loss. But again, I guess it's sort of along the same lines as what my husband's saying, that I didn't let it stop me and not plan ahead and think out of the box what I could do with my life to make the best out of it. So.
We'll be right back to this week's episode. But first, for over 35 years, Wheels to Lease has changed the way people get cars by making it simple, honest, and trust-free. No high-pressure sales, no hidden fees, no games. Whether you're buying, financing, leasing new or used, any make, any model, they'll get you the best deal every time. Yeah. Their white glove service means you can do the entire process by phone, no showrooms, no back offices. Just tell them what you want and they'll handle the rest. From finding the car, delivering it straight into your door. Wheels to Lease is built on integrity, fairness, and customer happiness. That's why families have trusted them for decades. Call or text 718-871-8715. You can email them at inspire@wheelstolease.com or visit wheelstolease.com/inspire. Or just hit the link in the show notes. What's up, my buddy Sal? Directly, he will take care of you. Now, before we jump back in, I was at BitBing recently and they showed me a system they built for a nursing home chain that had been drowning in spreadsheets and manual processes for billing, vendor payments, staff scheduling, and compliance. And honestly, a lot of the programs that the place had before was from 2015, but that's 10 years old. I know it's crazy as it sounds. And that's not 2025. But today, BitBeam built them something that runs through a clean custom system that just works, freeing up their team to focus on growth instead of putting out fires. That's what BitBeam does. They do it for any business ready to scale, whether you're in healthcare, real estate, finance, logistics, technology, or any other industry. BitBeam takes the mess, the regulations, the paperwork, the inefficiencies, and transforms it into seamless software that drives your business forward. They don't just build systems, they build tools that help you grow faster and smarter. If you're serious about taking your business to the next level, talk to Bipping. It might be the smartest move you ever make. Visit them at bipping.com and they'll be sure to give you a free consultation. Now back to this week's episode.
What's the dumbest thing someone could say to you or the way they could treat you? We're pulling the gloves off over here.
There isn't a lot.
No?
Or maybe just because I've heard so many of them so many different times. I think the one that comes close to it, I'll give you two. One is someone saying Refuah Shalema. And, you know, I sort of smirk inside when I hear that. And it doesn't, it's I don't want to say washes over me. And the truth is that very often it's done with good intentions.
Sure.
People have good machshava, good intentions. I'm sure they're not trying to be just smart about it. And ultimately the person is giving you a bracha, so why not accept it, etc. So I don't take it personally as an offense. However, I think maybe if I can expand on that, is when people speak past me. It happens less now as an adult and someone who has a reputation, Baruch Hashem, in many different facets of life, and generally when I get into a conversation, they probably know who they're talking to, etc. To some extent. However, definitely when I was younger, this would happen more frequently. It happens on rare occasions today, where I will get to a meeting, to an appointment, or you get into a conversation. There's somebody standing next to me, and instead of them speaking to me, they're speaking to the other person as if either I'm not there or the person who's happens to be in a wheelchair doesn't have the intelligence to carry a conversation. And it can get frustrating, especially when it's about that person and they're like completely speaking over you and as if you're not in existence. A story like that comes to my mind is many years ago. My good friend Morty and I went to, I don't remember which organization it was, so it's also maybe not the right thing to mention the name of an organization, but one of the well-known organizations in our community that, ironically enough, does wonderful work for those with, I think, mostly emotional challenges. And they were putting on one of their annual concerts. And so me and my buddy Morty, we go to the concert. And as we make our way into the concert hall to find our seats, there is, I think, the president over the organization. And he turns to my buddy Morty and he says, well, thank you for bringing him. And my buddy Morty, who's pretty quick, he says, you have it completely upside down. Without this guy, I never would have shown up over here. He's the guy who schlepped me over here. He drove me here. And so but I don't, whatever, fine, whatever. To me, it's okay, whatever. I just move on. Don't take it personal. But those are sort of quirky things.
Rochel, Yenti, how about you?
Okay, so there's like these comments, that people think, when they say it, I'm for sure going to feel good about it, right? You are such an inspiration. You are so amazing. Or like Nebuch, when Mashiach comes, he'll be the first one to get your vision back. All these things that they really think they're making me feel good. Again, well-intentioned, not really, doesn't really make someone feel as good. If someone tells me, you're an inspiration, and because you are an inspiration, I will do something good for myself or for someone else, or especially someone who's blind, great, then I accept it. Just plain because you're amazing and inspiration doesn't really make me feel so good. Sometimes it's the opposite. They put me on a pedestal and I'm so amazing until it comes to real life when I want, or a visually impaired person or anyone with a disability or challenge needs a job or needs, for shidduchim purposes or other things, then you don't really want to know the person. So, don't say it, just do it. Rather do something good about it instead of saying, and if you're saying it, say it the right way to really make me feel good. That you're making a difference, or in what way I'm making a difference, a real way, not something, just convoluted or.
Yeah, I'll expand on that before you get to your next question.
Please.
And so we put on a big event for life insurance advisors a couple of weeks ago. And I get people come over and say, what you're able to do, even as a guy who's in a wheelchair, is so inspiring.
Oh, gosh.
And I say, well, tell me how I can cash it in. And kidding aside, we've had this conversation offline in the past, and almost having chutzpah to suggest that we rename this Impact for the Nation instead of Inspiration for the Nation. But this is a story that is told over of Zig Ziglar, who was a very well-known motivational speaker. And someone once came over to Zig and said, Zig, your talks, your speeches, they're wonderful. The motivation is phenomenal, but it lasts a couple of hours, maybe a day or 2, 3 days. But at some point, it just goes away. Like, what's the tachlis? What's the point of it? And he said, young man, how often do you shower? And of course, motivation, inspiration is important to keep us going day to day. To me, it's more about the impact. To me, it is more about the influence that we have on people that see us day to day, and the things that they can do in their life in real meaningful ways. So to me, of course, it's about the impact. And I know we spoke about this as well offline, which is, would you have invited us, quite frankly, if I would not have had to be a wheelchair user to be having this conversation over here today, right? And so, of course, we know that at least you get a pass because I've been...
Yeah, you've been on kosher money.
On kosher money, on living l'chaim before, right? So definitely you get a pass. But the point of it is, and this is something I think about myself, and this is something that I hope others in their own life, a physical challenge or many other different challenges, that the Rebbeinu Shalom gives them the siyata d'shmaya, that they have the ability to see past that they are not defined by that challenge that they're living with. Of course, it'll be their guide. It'll be impactful to them and to those around them. Ideally, I don't want to be known as the fellow who's in a wheelchair.
Right.
And I don't think of it that way. And I think people that have challenges, whether it's physical, emotional, or financial, that should not be the defining characterization of what their life is about. And that's something that I strive to rise above. And that is a big reason why we're sitting here today, which is hopefully people, they'll be inspired. But more importantly, that we hope that there's 1, 2, or 3 ideas that they get from the stories that we share today that will help them in their day-to-day life.
I really love that. And sometimes people say, like, who qualifies to be on Inspiration for the Nation? And to me, and it sounds cheesy, but I really believe it. I think everyone could be a guest on the show. The problem or the challenge is, will someone click on it? And you always need to get someone to be like, oh, that looks interesting. Because if they don't click on it, then they don't watch. But I feel like very often people click on it, maybe for the wrong reason, or maybe we clickbait them for the wrong reason. And it's accurate. Okay. But then they're getting more out of it or hearing something that they didn't realize. And I love what you just said there.
No, I get that. One of the ideas that I have for promoting maybe our conversation today is a big billboard with 4 or 5 or 6 guys who all of us are wheelchair users, and just like our professional titles, what we do, right? One of us runs an insurance agency. Another one is an attorney. Another one is an accountant working for the city of New York. These are very accomplished people. If you were to take them, their wheelchairs on the side for a couple minutes, they all stand on their own right in very impressive ways.
Right. Yeah. I'm getting scared of like how we're going to actually title this and put the thumbnail with you guys happy, but we'll figure that out at a later point. I'm curious what your advice, and you probably, bump into these kinds of people all the time, maybe looking for advice, maybe they're younger than you and they have some sort of challenge. It could be physical or whatever it is. And you see them falling into that identity of like, oh, I am the person without hands. I am the person in a wheelchair. I am the person who's blind, whatever it is. What do you tell them? Because I feel like we, as a society, we do want to help people when they need help, but sometimes we feed into that a little too much.
So I think I touched on some of those already, which is don't let that stop you. Don't let that define you. I know it's not easy to just flip a switch and get there. It's a process. And, I'm suggesting that I was very cognizant of it all along. To me also, I think I would add to that, it's really tuning into a purpose. And one of the struggles that I would say every believing person has is we were sent to this world on a mission. It's our avodah to find out what the mission is. And it's not an easy thing to do, for sure, I would think. However, I think if you have a very clear challenge that you need to put lots of work into, lots of effort into, or maybe that helps you accelerate your path to actually finding what your mission in life is. And so I would suggest to people to embrace it. A while ago, my wife put together a beautiful Shabbaton in Borough Park for girls that are legally blind, visually challenged, etc. And we had the honor of having Rabbi Yonah Eisberger come and address the women at Malava Malka. And it's just a funny way how it came about, but it was just very super generous of him to come and share his own life story and really just be there to take it in, to listen. He didn't have time to prepare because I invited him Friday night. But he made sure to come and just give of his time in just a beautiful way. But one of the most powerful things I think that even I walked away with, and what he shared with them is he shared the story about someone who literally had to have their limbs cut off, major arteries. And this is a person, take it to a very well-known story. This is a person who had like a whole life journey planned out. Senior job on Wall Street, planned promotions, and just a very exciting life ahead of themselves in their mind. And what they told Reisenberger is, and if we can repeat it, of course, just in context of the story, that the Rebbeinu Shalom God is terrible. He won't even let me take my own life, is what the person said. And in a subsequent conversation, of course, this is not an easy topic or conversation to have, but in a subsequent conversation, Rav Eisenberger explained to the person, you had this beautiful life planned out, and suddenly this happens, and everything has just gotten short-circuited, and you can't see past your situation as it is today, and it is a very challenging situation. What he told the person is, look, in today's modern age, you can get prosthetics, you can get bionic arms or whatever it is that will help restore your independence, your ability to get on in life. Might just be a different way for you to do it. But all these opportunities will be there for you. The way to get there is by accepting that the Rebbeinu Shalom put you in this place, in this time, in this circumstance, to do your life, but do it this way. And of course, I will admit to you and to anyone that it's very different growing up the way I did. Although I was born, quote unquote, normal, I don't remember a different life. And it's different for people who have an accident or an illness later on in life. It's a very different way of coping with that, I'm sure.
I feel like your wife would be an example of that, of, being able to see when she's younger.
Absolutely.
And then
but let me just share with you, I think a story that, what I just shared with you is a heavy story. And it's true, but it's, I think some people can take it and not connect to it. But I think maybe a different way of saying is once a year, at least for the past many years, I've had, I don't do this often. I happen to know the Rebbe, so I accept the invitation. I speak to, I think it's a 6th grade at Yeshiva Spring Valley. At the end of the year, I get to speak to the Chevra. I don't come with it. I try and make it conversational with them so the kids can walk away with something meaningful, and not just that they listen to somebody in a wheelchair who came to show up and deliver like a prepackaged PowerPoint presentation. And so one of the things I share with them, and although maybe this year the story is going to get old or the kids might not even remember it at this point, in our neighborhood there is a 7-Eleven. And right next to the 7-Eleven, there's an overpass over the New York State Thruway, major highway in our area. And they took the overpass down. They were going to rebuild it. And so in order to get to 7-Eleven, you had to find a new way to get there because you couldn't pass through that overpass anymore from that side of the neighborhood. And I would ask the kids, like, if you wanted really to go to 7-Eleven and you wanted to get yourself Slurpee, whatever it is, how would you get to 7-Eleven? And I stay quiet. And the kids, they start like there's a whole chatter. They would take what's known as Remsen, which is another way around, or they would come from Spookrock Road, which is another way around. Or some kid would say, well, they can take the exit 14A and come back 14B and then drive up Route 59, which these are all streets, of course, in our neighborhood in the greater Monsey area. And last year or the year before, there was a creative kid that said, they could take a helicopter. And I said, this is exactly the point. All of us in life, there are places we want to get to, places we should be getting to. We have different ways of getting there. And to me, often that is getting there by using my wheelchair to get there.
I like the helicopter kid.
Yeah.
He travels in style. My favorite part from the Bodeks is coming up. But first, I've been thinking lately about how lucky I feel to do the work that actually fits who I am. It uses the strengths Hashem gave me, it supports my family, and it feels right. And I really want that for every single one of you. So if you're in a place where you're trying to figure out what's your next step or how to build a career that works long-term, I want you to look into the BS in computer programming from Woodman College. This is a fully online, friend-friendly degree that teaches you real practical skills. I'm talking about things like software development, coding, IT, app building, and cybersecurity. The tech field is growing fast and it offers real opportunities for people who want to build a solid, reliable parnasa. Plus, with this degree, you'll learn all the newest evolving technologies and how to use AI, which is pretty big now. What I love about it is you can start anytime. Yes, even tomorrow. You can transfer in a lot of credits to finish sooner. And it's much more affordable than most programs. And there are scholarships available. If you're supporting a frum family, this kind of career can make all the difference. It's not just about passion. It's about practicality. This is a real income potential here. This isn't a gamble. It's a smart investment in a future that you deserve. If this sounds like something that could work for you, or maybe your kids or someone you know, go to woodmancollege.edu/computer programming technology. Honestly, it's just easier to go into the show notes and click on the link, or just check out the link in the show notes. Like I said, it might be the right next move. Honestly, if you're not sure, just check them out. They're really kind people and you can talk it over with them. Now, before we dive back into this week's episode, when it comes to books, the L'chaim Book Club has the best Feldheim books for your shelves. This month, we're doing a deep dive into the best books for the 3 weeks. We're going to start off with the first book. The Churban Comic brings the story of the Churban to life for kids with gripping artwork and a storyline they won't want to put down. And this is from the same team that you know that had the best-selling books that we mentioned them here before, the Tainaim and Amarim series. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, it's easy to read, it's fun, and your kids will really enjoy it. Now, I know you're asking yourself, Yaakov, I'm not a child, and I want a book for an adult. Well, we got you covered. All for the Boss is one of the books that sticks with you forever. This is a classic. It's great, and I personally love it. It tells the true story of a man who stood proudly for Torah values when it wasn't popular, inspiring generations to live with strength and faith. And also, maybe you are a young reader. There's also a young reader's edition, so your kids can catch the inspiration too. I highly recommend it. And if you're looking to deepen your Tehillim, the Hirsch Tehillim Compact Edition is a game changer. Beautifully designed, really gorgeous, and it fits in your talis bag or purse, ready whenever you want to pour your heart out into tefillah. I see this in so many shuls, so many tefillin bags, so many people have it, and there's a reason why so many people love it. You can get all of these books in your local bookstore, or you could go to feldheim.com and get an extra 10% off on any of these with the code word INSPIRE. We'll link it down below. Get ready for the 3 weeks with our good friends at Feldheim. Now back to this week's episode. Do you feel like people use people who are handicapped as like their chesed projects? Is that a common thing?
That is, I think my wife touched on that a little bit earlier about people telling us how inspiring we are. Personally, I haven't experienced it that much or too much at all, really. And I think very often they're done with kindness and with the right mindset. So I can't speak directly because I haven't experienced it, but I can see that there is sort of a market for that, for lack of a better word. But again, I don't know that I can speak directly to it because Baruch Hashem, I haven't experienced that in that way. I will share with you maybe something that speaks to that, but maybe a little different way, which is 1 year during the Hakafis. I was at Rav Schlesinger Shul, Rav Schlesinger Shul in Monsey, who's our Rav. And the place was packed. It was happening. People were dancing. And in the commotion, my strommel fell off. And so somebody picked up the strommel. And it's sometimes the smallest things that show that people are respectful and they think. Instead of him plopping the strommel on my head, he said, "Yo, Yitzchak, here's your strommel." He maybe not even have realized what he did. But I think it speaks to your question maybe in a different way. He was respectful of me. I'm a person. Don't just plop the strommel back on my head. To the flip side of that, and I'm sure this was done with good intentions, and I don't carry any grudges. There's a very well-known Rav Rebbe in the Chasidish world who does a beautiful hakafis. And as a kid, my father would take me to his hakafis. That was one of the steps that we would make during Simchas Torah, Shemini Atzeres. And he had this custom of wheeling me around. There are hundreds, maybe thousands of Hasidim standing in sort of in the bleachers, whatever it is. And he's dancing with the Torah like in the middle. And when I showed up, he would take me and push me around. At some point, I told my father, I'm not going to that hakafis. It was done, I'm sure, with beautiful intentions. Right. And I'm sure others would appreciate it. To me, I felt terrible about it. I would, in similar vein, when my oldest sister got married, I was a young kid. I remember the exact age, maybe 8, 9. I don't remember the exact age. Some I think somewhere in that range. And my father's friend, who was just a phenomenal fellow, instead of pushing me around in the circle, just said, "Yo, Yitzchak, we're going to dance." And we danced. He held on to my hands instead of pushing me, and we figured out how to dance. And although my dancing has slowed down recently because of my back, me being a little bit more careful. But in my younger years, if I was at a chasna, if you weren't dancing, you were going to be pulled into that circle. And so it's that mindset that I think is not only respectful, it's empowering. And when a kid sees how they're being treated in this way, which is uplifting, instead of telling them how inspirational they are, but it's uplifting, it's inviting them into something new, it's inviting them into something more mature, I think that is very empowering to them. And often more so than telling people something, it's showing them and it's doing something with them. And as parents, I think that's very empowering to kids. And if you're an adult in a shul who there's a kid in a wheelchair, it's these type of things that will make an impact on that person rather than telling them how inspiring they are.
No, I think the root of what you're saying is like the best thing you could do for someone, going to a channel, whatever it is just treat them like a normal person.
Absolutely.
Like that's what everyone wants. Everyone wants to fit in, and they want to be treated as they are, not for the exterior or things that maybe someone's like seeing, identifying, like, oh. And also, like, sometimes people get like you mentioned before, when they ignore you, like they just sometimes get like awkward about it, you know, because I think like you're saying, like they have the right intentions, but they don't want to say the wrong thing. So therefore they don't say anything and they don't acknowledge you, which is doing the exact reverse of what they're trying to do. If there was one person in history that you could sit down with and meet, who would it be? We'll start with you, Rochel Yenti.
Can I just touch on the advice part for a little bit?
Sure. Oh, please. Oh, please.
Okay. So, definitely agree with everything my husband says. We actually have 2 different lists on our website, insidebeyondeyesight.org. One is 10 silly things blind people shouldn't say to themselves. And one is 10 silly things not to say to blind people. So a lot of it includes what my husband said, and I'll just, touch on it a little bit. Just in general, I feel that like, number one is for the person themselves to have the confidence and the right tools and the right skills. Because, if they don't want people to treat them a certain way, they have to also behave themselves a certain way and, project themselves that way and be confident and know what their abilities are and know what their rights are and, and just feel comfortable with themselves. That's a start for starters. And of course, the attitude of family and friends and everyone around them, it makes a huge, huge difference. They can't do it themselves sometimes. Sometimes, people do things out of, rahmanas, or just because they really, really want them to fit in. So I have like a new pet peeve that just came up recently as a teacher of the visually impaired. I encounter a lot of different situations and, between, students and schools at home. And I'm always trying to make them be more independent and more, self-advocate. And of course, people around them to be more aware of what their needs are and do it in a proper way. But there was an issue about one of my students, not being able to do her hair on her own, because right now it seems like the style is a middle part. You do a ponytail in the middle part. I know it sounds stupid, but it's very hard. I mean, technically, maybe somebody could do it by touch, but I actually did like a little bit of a survey. I spoke to a school. I sometimes do, speaking to different schools, and I spoke to a school last week, and I asked them, how many of you, do your hair without looking in the mirror? And nobody, they're all looking in the mirror because it has to be perfect. And I said, if there's somebody who's visually impaired and the only way they're going to do their hair independently is going to be without doing that middle part and maybe doing the style a little differently, but that means the difference between somebody doing it for them or not. Don't you think, at least I think I'd much rather be independent and be a drop different than dependent and just like everyone else. So it's like so powerful to me that like you really should hold your own and know who you are, as opposed to always having to fit in. And that takes away from yourself, from your independence, and whatever else it is.
I would expand on that for just a minute, this idea, because I think it's a very important thing before we wrap up, which is, I think Shlomo Melech that teaches us Chanech Lana al Pidarka, right? Which is that every kid should be getting an education in a way that's helpful to them, right? And for some, it is by being gentle with them. By some, it's setting guidelines and being a little more strict, whatever it is. And this is something that I had to overcome with sending one of our boys to a different yeshiva that I originally was not very fond of. And Baruch Hashem, looking back, it was the best decision that we made, but I was struggling with it. Because to me, as I said earlier, we have these ideas of where we think...
Right. Our plan. It's
our
not
plan,
going according to our
and this
plan.
didn't exactly go according to the plan, at least the way I perceived it. Looking back, Baruch Hashem, it was one of the smartest things that we did. But the point of it is, and I know we're talking to a very broad audience, so this is not, for one, what I'm sharing, everyone should take it and interpret it in their own life, in their community that they live in respectfully, which is, if your kid needs access to certain technology, and maybe it's not the custom, or maybe it's not something that the school will provide, either because it is not in line with their hashkafa, it's not in line with their belief system, maybe it's just not, they're financially not going to support it, right? Well, if that's what your kid needs to empower them, discuss it with your local Orthodox rabbi, right? But understand that your kid might need something that your other kids didn't need, right? I forget who it was. We listened to so many things today, so I don't remember where this is from.
It's probably from this podcast. No.
It could be. I think it was maybe the podcast that I think Ellie did on Chasanas, right?
Huh.
And I think there was this conversation about fairness, or maybe mixing something up. But whoever it was saying, look, if there's a kid that needs a root canal, the other kids don't need it. You're not taking everyone to dentist for a root canal, right? And of course, it's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but it is true in life. If your kid needs something different than your other kids, be it technology, be it a different school that maybe your family would not have sent to otherwise, understand that this is what they need. Also, I would expand it by going into maybe a slightly different area, which is by not taking those steps, the end result is it's adding insult to injury. You're taking someone who has challenges that they need to overcome, and you're not giving them the tools to do it. So the other thing that also happens is that the parents who may have all the energy to take care of that kid right now, they will not have the ability to care for that kid when that kid grows up to be an adult and the parents are now in their 70s. They no longer have the koyach to schlep that kid. And the siblings have their own families. And by taking that away, you're adding insult to injury in a way that's not forgivable.
Okay, so now should I tell you who I want to meet?
Yes. Let's get to it.
Okay. So about, I think 6 or 7 years ago, I read a book. The title of it is The Blind Doctor, about a blind person who lived over 100 years ago. His name was Dr. Jacob Balatin, and how he struggled and made his way up all the way to become a certified doctor, first blind person. And unfortunately, don't think there have been many since then. It's an amazing book. He happens to have been Jewish, not religious. His parents were religious, but in those days, not too many people were religious altogether. But a lot of parts of this book touched me. Unfortunately, a lot of the struggles he had are still the same, even though we have all the ADA and all the rights and all the disability accommodations, and we have technology, we have so much, but then some of it is still, unfortunately, the same as his struggles. So, I guess sometimes I feel like I'm almost like the representative of the visually impaired. Like I take the burden is on my shoulders. Sometimes that's how I feel. I don't know if I should be. I do work. We have a sister organization, Computer Services for the Blind, CSB Care. And I also work with other organizations, Jewish Braille Institute. There are some other organizations, but they're more like for technical, like materials and texts. But in terms of support, many times I feel like I'm the only one in the Jewish world at large, and for sure in the Frum world, and I wish I could talk to him. He did a lot more than just being a doctor. He also started like a Boy Scouts group for blind kids, and he even went around. He was as popular as Helen Keller in his day, and he was forgotten besides for this book. And I don't think there's much. My wish is that we could do a children's book, about him. Maybe not for young children, but a little older, so that my students could read about him. It sounds almost unattainable, all his skills and all whatever he reached, but at least a little bit try, to at least look up to him and see, to at least try to take some of the skills he had and some of the, it's just something to look up to and something to aspire to. I actually went to his caver last year in the summer. He's in Chicago. And that's when I was like, oh, we got to do something more about him. I almost forgot him, but I just remembered that one day when I go to Chicago, I'm going to daven there. And I went there. And that since then, I'm like a little bit obsessed, with him. And I just feel like we have to do something in his memory and something that can also accomplish a lot for all the blind and visually impaired kids now. I thought I knew everything about visually impaired. I've been running this organization for so many years, but I only became a teacher of the visually impaired about 4.5 years ago. That's when I started working with totally blind kids, one-on-one. Until then, it was like support, talking to the parents, talking to them by phone. But until I was actually in the fire and really working with them, I didn't realize how many challenges they have, much more than someone with low vision. Baruch Hashem, I'm so grateful for every bit of vision I have. Even though my vision is deteriorating as I get older, I still have a lot of vision. And I'm even more so, grateful for it now. So totally blind kids have a whole set of challenges, and in the expectations, it's a lot of it, like I said before, it's themselves knowing what they're capable of and the people around them letting them even try to be, to do or accomplish and not be afraid that they're going to get hurt or they're going to make a fool out of themselves or they're going to look different or it's going to look strange. So I think there's a lot to be learned, and I'd love to hear what he has to say. He actually did speak, later on in life. He didn't live very long. He only lived to age 36.
Oh, wow.
But I think he accomplished what I dream of maybe accomplishing in my whole lifetime. I'm older than him by now. And I think there's a lot to learn from him. There's just something about it. So, yeah.
I think you're going to find it hard to answer because you're just so used to it. But I'm curious. Every relationship, everyone's giving and others are receiving, and this is a back and forth. In what way do you, because of your challenges, rely on your spouse in a way that maybe typically someone doesn't? Again, you only know from your relationship, so it's hard to even compare. But I'm curious if you guys even have any, insight into how yours is maybe a little different.
Sure. So on a very practical level, there is certain things I physically cannot do or not.
Like driving, you drove here.
I drive, right.
Do you typically drive? Meaning, do you both have car? I don't know. I'm just curious how that.
No. So far, automatic.
You're the designated driver.
Not only does they drive, but
Self-driving cars haven't
self-driving
been
vehicles are not the
put out
main,
to the
are
public
not,
yet.
not in the public domain yet. When that comes around, that'll be a game changer, I'm sure, for lots of people.
Sure.
But definitely in a practical sense, there are certain things that I physically
That's in terms of me, but my husband does drive with.
that I physically
Right.
cannot
Controls.
do. That definitely, whether it's my wife or other people, and we've spoken a lot about independence and empowerment. At the same time, I think it's also important for people not to walk away with a message that asking for help is going to make you less than, or it's something that is to be embarrassed of. And just a quick story. This is something that I share to illustrate a point. If I'm out shopping for groceries, which I often do, and I'd like to get cream cheese, but it's on the third shelf and I physically can't reach it, right? I have two choices I can make. I can decide not to take it and just leave it there and come home without it. Or I can ask the shopper standing next to me or somebody who's working at the grocery or supermarket and say, would you mind please giving me the cream cheese? And that is the type of advocacy or help that's actually empowering. There's nothing to be embarrassed of. More directly to your question, of course, so there are physical things that definitely my wife will assist with that I cannot do. At the same time, whether it's cooking or things that need visual inspection, those are things that I will, of course, be more involved in. In fact, I enjoy cooking. I find it to be a calming exercise. I've learned to whip up certain different dishes, and it's something that an experience that I've come to appreciate. I enjoy trying different recipes, something new. And so in the practical sense, that is the way it's worked out. But of course, beyond that, the relationship is, as with any good, healthy relationship, there's lots of things that we'll lean on one another for.
Some of it is specifically because of our disabilities, but sometimes it's not necessarily. People could possibly, think it's because, attributed to our disabilities. But like, for instance, the cooking he mentioned, I have a lot of visually impaired friends who are very good cooks. And sometimes they adapt things, they do it differently, they modify it. They'll smell when it's ready, they'll have different techniques. It's not something that ever, hit off with me. I tried, sometimes I'll still try a little bit, but I'm so grateful that my husband took on more of the cooking and the food responsibility. And shopping is something that is more of a universal issue for people who are visually impaired. But even that nowadays, if you're a good internet shopper, or if, there's actually something very new that I started using some of the time, there's even a phone AI thing that you can order things on different platforms. There's Alexa, but Alexa.
Oh, it's like voice.
Yeah,
voice.
Voice. And you describe exactly what you need. So there are different venues and different, there's different ways of doing it, but it doesn't always mean that because, it definitely, I'm sure it adds another, level of challenge for me, the cooking. And that's possibly why I also don't like it so much, but it's not that you can't do it. It's just like not something that's like my top interest. And something that I'm so grateful my husband does the cooking and I do the cleaning, so it's that works for us. It doesn't, mean that it's not doable because of our disabilities sometimes.
Okay.
I think we're getting towards the end of it. And one idea, if we can, Yaakov, I'd like to share,
Sure.
Which is, I don't think I'm getting old just yet in the sense of old, right? I still consider myself to be fairly young, but the point I wanted to make is when I was growing up, the idea of influencers, that's like a new thing.
Right.
It was non-existent. So when I was growing up, there were role models. There were people to look up to, people that you can learn things from. And for better or for worse, those have gotten replaced with influencers. But for our part, and one of the reasons we agreed to come is so many weeks ago, we were at a Shabbaton for adults and kids that have spina bifida. We were invited to be there. And I made it a point to try and interact with as many folks in the audience as I could. I felt there's maybe something that they would want to discuss as something, although I don't have spina bifida, there's often similar characteristics that we deal with in a physical way. And I got to speak with lots of them. And in the audience, there was a young boy, I think he's getting to bar mitzvah age soon. I got to schmooze with him, and then he wanted to know, do you have a car? I said, I have a car. And he said, can I check it out? I said, of course, after Shabbos, we can go down to the parking lot. And so we did. We go down to the parking lot, and he gets into the car, and it's not the typical, as you've seen, it's not the typical accessible van with a ramp. I've got a slightly different setup that works for me. And he just couldn't get enough. He was there with his father, and he's going on. When he grows up, this is what he wants. And almost we couldn't tear him away from it. And when we're done, we make our way back up, and I bump into a good friend of ours, and Avrami. And Avrami says, many years ago when I was a boy, you showed me your car in the parking lot and how it worked and the hand controls and how you get in, how you get out. And you should know it made a significant difference in my life. And it's that type of thing that motivates me to do this. Avrami, as you know, Baruch Hashem is married, has two wonderful little boys.
Sure.
His wife does tremendous artwork, something that some of your listeners might want to check out. But I do want to finish with role models. So when I grew up, there were many different role models. I remember there was in Williamsburg, there's a Neitra Beis Medrash, there's a yeshiva in Mankisko Neitra. One of the people that was, I don't know if he was an administrator, I forget what his role was, but is somebody that lived with polio and got around with crutches. And that's one of the people that my parents introduced me to when I was young, just to be able to see somebody who's grown up to lead a very productive life. And more recently, and this is already for many years, I've gotten to know a wonderful person by the name of Aaron Margalit from Eretz Yisrael. Aaron Margalit has become very well known with his book Et Halech, As Long As I Live, which has been interpreted into many different languages. We've had the good fortune of visiting him in Eretz Yisrael. Have had the good fortune of hosting him at 2 different events here in New York. And I think he does a wonderful job at not only sharing his story, but they've also turned his story into a comic series, which is a very popular series. And I think it's a wonderful way for both kids and adults to not only learn his story, but learn lessons for life. And one of the things that I took away from him, which was very empowering at the time and still today, is as long as the Rebbeinu Shalom gives you the ability to function and to do, you just go on. And this became very true to me. I think it's about 14 years ago since I've had the back surgery, give or take, about 14 or 15, somewhere in that timeline. I'd gone through lots of different medical procedures when I was growing up, but this was very different. Not only was it going to be a very intensive back surgery, but also we were not only married, but we already had young little boys. And so the thought process of doing something that potentially could be life-changing was I don't want to say paralyzing, but it weighed very heavily on me. It was a very scary thing. And through my conversations with him and reading his story and knowing somebody like that, having someone as a role model, I knew that so long as the Rebbeinu Shalom gives me the opportunity to go on, it's my mission to go on. And besides for everything else, besides for struggles that I have, and Baruch Hashem, I get to show up in lots of interesting and different places and in very powerful ways, but it doesn't mean that I don't have daily struggles. I have daily struggles. And even with that, Baruch Hashem, I'm able to go on. And I'd say in my adult life, he was definitely a very powerful role model to me. And I would encourage parents who, and it doesn't have to be as significant of a challenge, if you will, but that is a person that I have been fortunate to get to know, and hopefully him and all of our fellow Yidden in Eretz Yisrael are safe. But definitely, if we're talking about people that I would have been impactful to me, besides my parents, of course, he was definitely someone who's a very strong figure in my life.
Really beautiful. I'm going to end off this interview with the opposite of what I should say. Well, even though you're in a wheelchair and that you're visually impaired, you guys did a really good job. No, there's a joke. I was making a joke. I was like doing the thing that people, you guys aren't laughing, so now it's like super awkward. No, I was doing the exact thing where, like, people say the stupid thing.
Right. No, and that is
Don't worry, this wasn't inspiring. It was impactful.
No, as I said, inspiration is good. We're not running away from that as much as we want to emphasize the part that if you can take it and actually do something with it, it'll last. And it would be way more meaningful, not only to us for giving of our time, but for
the people listening and trying to change their life.
I was telling my niece this morning, I said, we're doing this interview, and I told her, the whole, she knows about my whole inspiration issue, that if it just stays with the inspiration, nothing happens and it's worthless. She said she actually she heard, I think, Joey Aber saying that when you're inspired, take a book and write down what you're inspired about. And I would add to that and write down some ideas and plans of what you're going to do with that inspiration for yourself, for others, and
make it practical.
A difference. Make it practical.
Make a difference. Shkoyach, thank you so much for doing this.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you made it this far, you made it to the deep end, the very end of this week's episode. Please comment the word great, or maybe your favorite lessons or points that they made. Do you agree with the Bodeks? Are they being too critical on Yaakov Linger, or do they have a point? I think they have a point, but I want to hear what you have to say. We wish them much aslacha on their continued journey. And before I get to my final thoughts, again, thank you to our good friends at Will's Lease. You need a car, go to them. Thank you to our friends at BitBean. If you need custom software, they're the people. Woodman College is providing such incredible programs for young and older people. So go check them out. And of course, pick up your latest book for the 3 weeks or Tisha B'Av at Feldheim.com and use code word INSPIRE for 10% off. You know, we often think inspiration only comes from big moments or dramatic stories, but the real inspiration comes from those mundane, quiet moments. From a husband putting on tefillin each morning, even when getting out of bed is hard. From a wife preparing Shabbos licht, even when she can't see the flame. From two people building a home filled with Torah and Simcha, even when every small task takes extra effort. The Bodeks remind us that true greatness is found in everyday choices, in showing up, in smiling, in choosing to keep going, and in finding Hashem in the smallest parts of our day. We may not have the same challenges, but we all have our own moments to live with strength and joy, and to turn the ordinary, which is so much around us, into something holy. That is real inspiration. Remember, inspiration is everywhere. L'chaim.
Living L'chaim.